Welcome to the Heads Up podcast, brought to you by the National Migraine Centre, the only UK charity treating headache and migraine. Visit our website to book your appointment with a world-class headache doctor wherever you are in the UK. There is no need for a referral. You can refer yourself. Our headache specialist doctors are looking forward to helping you soon.
So, welcome again to another episode of Heads Up podcast. I'm concentrating a few episodes on that really intense and severe, horrendous headache condition called cluster headache. One of the things that I became aware of that is this is a poorly understood condition in adults, but it can also affect children, and we don't really talk about that very much at all. So I'm delighted today to welcome Dr. Isobel West, who is currently a researcher for doing a PhD in aspects of cluster headache, which she's going to talk to us about. But one of the reasons I wanted to have Isobel on the podcast was because she also has had cluster headaches since she was 15. So welcome to the podcast as well.
Thank you so much for having me on. Really excited to talk about this.
So I heard you speaking at a GP study day in King's. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you were doing at King's? And I know currently you're not in King's, you're in Leiden University. So explain a bit.
Yeah, so I'm currently undertaking a 4-year PhD. I'm not a doctor yet, but hopefully I will be at the end of 4 years. And I'm going to be investigating the underlying brain mechanisms that might be contributing to cluster headache, both as a phenotype and then as a personal kind of characteristic, and then also like attacks individually. So I am working in London with Dr. Phil Holland and Professor Peter Goadsby at King's College London, and then I'm actually in Leiden for a year to work with some researchers here, and we're going to be looking at working with some post-mortem brain tissue to see what we can find out about people's brains with cluster headache.
That's brilliant. And have you just started in Leiden? Whereabouts are you on that year?
Yeah, so I'm only a week in, so I've spent a week in the lab getting to know what I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to be working. So yeah, I'm really excited about it.
So we maybe need to have another chat in a year's time and see where you've got to with all of that.
Yeah.
So after I heard you talk, it was really interesting. I grabbed you, if you remember, and said, what age did you start having cluster headache? Because I was wanting to do this little series of podcasts, and you said to me 15. So do you want to tell us about that? What had you had any headaches prior to age 15? Any sort of things that stopped you going to school or anything like that, or did it come out of the blue?
Yeah, so I was trying to think about the first time that I had a cluster headache, and I can't really remember a first attack, and I can't remember having any other types of headaches. So I do remember it starting when I was about 15. So that's when it was taking me out of lessons. It would always be the first lesson, which would always be maths. And I'm sure that my teachers at school thought I was trying to get out of maths. But yeah, that's when I really started to have them daily, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And was that when you got the diagnosis, or did you just know that you were having really severe headaches and started
Yeah.
the path of trying to find out what they were?
So, I mean, I didn't know what they were for about 8 years. So I was diagnosed with cluster headache when I was 21. So for all that time, the doctor thought it was migraine. which I think is common in especially female patients, that cluster headache is misdiagnosed as migraine. But I mean, I found it hard as a child to really describe the pain that I was feeling. So, and how it might be different to migraine because I didn't have a reference point. I didn't know what migraine pain was.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any different. It was my early years where I was having these headaches, so I didn't have that kind of reference point.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were sorry.
I was just going to say, did anybody in your family have any have a experience of migraine or cluster headache?
Not that I know of.
Mm.
My parents don't have headaches. I don't know of anyone in my family that has them. So yeah, we didn't know. I didn't even know they existed. I didn't know other types of headache existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that people sometimes bandy about, which is just the normal headaches. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I just get the normal headache. So there's a sort of feeling in society that having some sort of headaches is a normal thing that people just put up with. So did you put up with it, or what? Can you sort of describe what you did when you were you going off to see the doctor, or were you just taking ibuprofen and paracetamol? What happened?
Yeah, I think it got to a point where I was being taken out of lessons too much, or I had to leave lessons too much. And the school would be concerned. They'd ring my mum, and my mum would pick me up. And then, of course, an hour later, 45 minutes later, I'd be fine again.
Yeah.
So it was disrupting my schooling a lot. So my mum did take me to the GP. She also saw kind of how distressed it made me,
Yeah.
because it's not that's the kind of agitation and distress that you see in cluster headache is very different behavior. And I think for my parents it was quite distressing to see me like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, they took me to the GP, but I think it's hard for doctors to see, or to, like, if they don't see the attacks, it's
Yeah.
really hard to just be like, oh, I know what that, I can imagine that that's difficult.
Mm.
So yeah, I was diagnosed with migraine. I think later on, when I was about 16, maybe, my mum took me to a neurologist at the National Migraine Centre. But there again, I think I think the diagnosis would continue to be migraine. Um, and again, I think that's because I was a child and I found it difficult to describe what I was feeling, to describe the length of the attacks accurately. I could obviously say that the pain was extreme, but that's personal. So
Yes.
um,
Hard to measure.
yeah, exactly. And I didn't know what were important facts to
Yeah.
report. So I didn't know that because I was having nasal congestion and the tearing, which is classic of cluster headache, that you get these um, additional autonomic symptoms, what we call them. And yeah, I didn't put two and two together. I didn't know that that was related to the headaches. So if you're not if you're not trained in that way, it's hard to know what's important information, especially for a teenager, I would say.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So you've mentioned some of the classical symptoms. The autonomic nervous system that controls sort of blood vessels in the skin and breathing are sort of all the automatic processes. And so red eye and watery eye and sometimes even a droopy eyelid can be part of that, and also the nasal congestion. But one of the things you mentioned is the distress and the severity of the pain. Did your attacks, or do they now, come on very suddenly, or was it a more gradual pain?
Mm.
You,
I think I definitely had warning signs that they were going to happen.
okay,
I'd feel quite lethargic. I'd yawn, which was a telltale sign. And then I'd kind of get this sharp pain in my nose, and then I knew that kind of 10 minutes later it'd be full blown kind of
right,
pain. So it was sudden enough that there was not really much I could do about it quickly to stop it, especially because in my teenage years I didn't have the correct medication or like the best medication for it.
Yeah.
So I was taking oral pain relief, and obviously that's not quick enough to stop a cluster headache attack. So yeah, they did come on quite suddenly. Yeah.
And which side of your head was it? Because one of the classic things is with cluster headache is it always seems to be on one side, and
Yeah.
you don't normally feel it on both sides of the head. Whereas with migraine, that can happen. It can
Yeah.
switch sides, or it can be
Yeah.
across the forehead, or
Mhm.
which.
No, I always had it on my left side. So, and I would always clutch the side of my head, and my mum would just be like, "Oh, like where is it in your on your head?" And it'd be like, "It's right here." Like it feels like my eye is like on fire. Um, so yeah, it like when I would describe the pain, I could describe accurately where it was. I'd be like, "It's here."
Yeah.
And it would sometimes, if it was really bad, it'd radiate down to my kind of jaw area. So just, yeah, facial, never like the back of my head or anything. So
Around up into your forehead, around your eyebrow, but
yeah,
deeply into your eye.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's a deep pain. It's a deep, sharp um, pain. It kind of feels like toothache times 100. In the wrong location, obviously. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of what I would. That's the kind of pain that I would attribute it to. It's not a throbbing pain
Yeah.
as in migraine. Yeah.
I've seen illustrations where people with cluster headache have done drawings of the pain to try and share what it feels like, and some of them, as one that stands out in my mind, is a depiction of a devil with a sort of hooking into the eye and just pulling and dragging at that side of the face. And I
Yeah.
think the excruciating nature of the pain is quite different although migraine attacks can be very, very severe, and people can,
Yeah.
almost not move. And I've been there myself, where I don't want to move because movement is going to make that pain bang and feel even worse. Um, the pain in cluster headache is quite a different one, I think, from what I've heard from patients.
Yeah, it feels like you can't escape it almost. It's like because it's in your head as well, it feels so deep in your head that you feel very isolated, feel like you can't escape your own body kind of. And you need to jump around and move around. Um and yeah, that I don't do this anymore, but when I was younger and I didn't know what it was, I would kind of bang my head or, that kind of thing. I do try and stay calm now, and it's a lot easier because I know what it is and I know it's not life threatening. That was a massive concern for me when I was younger. I was like, well, it's either migraine or it must be life threatening because the pain is just so bad and no one knows what it is. And I'm not relating to
Yeah.
the migraine description. So, yeah, I think it put me in a state that was kind of unrecognizable. And I think that actually comes with a lot of shame,
Yeah.
uh, because because if no one really understands what it's like, you start to doubt yourself and you think, oh gosh, am I being over dramatic? Or
Mm.
uh, so I think it's very isolating. It's hard to talk about that. If you say I have terrible headaches, they make me, in this really emotional state. I think some people can be like, really? Like,
Really? You're a teenage girl? Yeah, of course you're emotional. I can imagine.
oh, and it only lasts half an hour, and oh,
Yeah.
suddenly you're fine.
Why are you fussing? Yeah.
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 So, and then I think then when I would get those reactions, then I'd be like, okay, I need to really pretend it's not happening. It's embarrassing. I'll try and get through it. I'd sit there like just trying to get through it. Um, but yeah, it can make you feel quite alone, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were having, in those early days before you were diagnosed, were you having episodic cluster headache that you would have a bout that would start and then you'd have it daily for a while and then it would switch off? Or were you having it every day for months on end? What was the sort of frequency of
Yeah.
episodes?
I think I've always had episodic cluster headaches, so I usually have them around the end of summer. I have a bout around the end of summer, and I have one at the start of spring, normally in March, which is around Cluster Headache Awareness Day, because many people have bouts or worsening during that time. But I do get sporadic attacks between those bouts, but it's when I'm in bout, it's every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many attacks would you get during a day?
I count myself a little bit lucky because I only have one a day usually.
Okay.
And I know some people have many. So yeah. Yeah, at the moment I just have
Fingers crossed that
exactly.
one is enough from what
Yeah,
that one attack that you have lasts about sort of half an hour to an hour.
I would say half an hour to an hour.
Classically, we talk about cluster headaches, the attacks lasting between 30 minutes and 3 hours, which again are very different from migraine attacks, which can kind of roll on for 2 or 3 days. And then if you add in the prodromal and the postdromal phases before and after the attack, you can have 5 days affected. But with cluster headache, it's such a different picture. If you ask the right questions of people who have it, you suddenly think, well, this isn't migraine. It sounds very different. And the agitation, the severity are very different. But
sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say you bring up a good point about asking the right questions. I think, in hindsight, when I know what it is, it's kind of so obvious.
Yes.
Because I have such a classical kind of presentation of it. But if you're not asking the right questions, I mean, for example, when I was 14, I was asked, "Do you have aura?" Just in those words, do you have aura? No explanation of what aura was. So because I was so unwell and I would have sort of visual blurring, I'd be rubbing my eye, so I guess I would see stars, or, I didn't really know what aura was. And I said, oh, yeah, well, my eyes do go a bit funny. So then so then it was put down to, oh, you have migraine with aura. But of course, as a child and even adults don't know really that aura is so kind of well defined in that it's, this set of patterns, or it's zigzag patterns, or it's lines that you see. I don't think that's explained enough sometimes, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, that's really very true. Because even with adults, sometimes, we ask about aura and we have to say, and they say, what do you mean by that? And we have to say, well, as you say, the zigzag lines or the sort of sparkles or white spots, sometimes colored lines, sometimes blurred vision in the center of the visual field. So and aura tends to come and go, and then a migraine attack follows. But I can really understand how you saying, oh, my eyes go a bit funny, somebody would have said, oh, it must be migraine then. That's interesting. But thinking about the years that you were struggling with this and not diagnosed, your family, what was the impact on your family? They must have, it's horrible to watch a child suffering, and they must have had a pretty worrying time thinking, how can we help?
Yeah, definitely. I think my mum and dad I think they described feeling a little bit hopeless sometimes, because they could see I was struggling and it's so internal, and they'd not seen me in a state like that before. So I think for them it was really worrying. They really helped me get the help that I needed, because I think I would like to forget when I'm not having the attacks. I really would like to forget about them. And so I don't like to sort myself out with what I need. So my mum was really good at keeping that kind of continuity. And they really had to push to kind of get the help I needed. Even when I was diagnosed when I was 21, I was very kind of unmotivated to really, because you do have to push sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, they were really kind of instrumental in helping me with that.
That's good to hear. So they were, and what I'm hearing is they were not only supportive, but they utterly believed you, because I think the other thing is with transient things that come and go in fairly quick passage of time, it's very easy for people to sort of say, oh, is she making it up or what? But I guess with your agitation, it was obvious that this was an on-off thing that was there and then not there. It's not something.
Yeah. And I think it almost helps that there's that physical cue, because she could see that half of my face was kind of swollen and my eye was really red and tearing, and I just didn't look well. And I think she could, like, it's obvious when someone's having an attack that it's kind of, there is something really wrong with them, whatever it is. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering then, how was it your mum who sort of pushed and pushed for you to get a diagnosis? How did that happen that you got diagnosed?
Yeah, so when I was 21, I had a really bad bout. So at the end of summer, I was having them every day, and I would take aspirin before I was diagnosed. I'd take aspirin every time, and that was not working anymore. And I was like, this is really bad. And kind of my mental health took a really bad turn. I was on my own at university, so I didn't have my parents with me, who were kind of the only people around me who really understood how bad it was. So that pushed me to go to the doctors, and actually it pushed me to research a bit about other headaches. So I just looked at, like, I have terrible headaches, Google, and I came across cluster headache, and it was really it was the autonomic symptoms that made me think, oh my gosh, I have those symptoms. So I kind of came to the doctor with an idea of, this is what I think I have. What do you think? And so then that's what led to me to my diagnosis.
Yeah. So you were very instrumental in empowering yourself to help clinicians to get you the right treatment. So I think that's really interesting, really important, and partly why I do the podcast, because I think empowering people to manage their headaches, because there isn't enough education out there, I think, about headache disorders.
Yeah.
So did it make a difference? So you were saying you were at university when you were suffering through your teenage years. Obviously you're going to do GCSEs and A levels and make decisions about your studies and career. Did it affect that? Did you think, oh, well, I won't do that because I get these terrible headaches? Or did you just sort of think, right, I'm going to do what I want to do and I'll push on through?
I think it didn't affect my choices. I was always quite determined, I think, not to let it stop me doing anything. And I think also my parents were, they don't like to make it all about my headaches. Like, I think they were still very much like, you can do what you set out to do. So it didn't really affect my choices for my A levels or my bachelor's. Obviously, there were periods where I found it really hard with keeping up with my studies. But yeah, I could kind of manage it because mine is episodic. So luckily they wouldn't come in exam season. And so I think, but then when I finished my bachelor's, that's when I was, towards the end of it was when I was diagnosed, and that's when I got really interested in it scientifically. And I attended Ouch that summer, and I met a lot of other patients. It was really eye-opening. I also met Professor Peter Goadsby, and I told him that I wanted to enroll for the master's program at King's. so that's what I did, and I kind of set out to. I really wanted. I had such a motivation to find out more about the disorder because I realised that it's such a mystery what goes on in the brain, and that's really interesting that something actually is happening in the brain
Yeah.
uh, with headache, because I guess we take it for granted because of the location of headache, but there are no pain receptors in the brain. So what is going on to make us feel that pain in our head, in the vessels, in the face, in the head, not actually in the brain, you know? So um, that's when that's when I decided that I wanted to study clinical neuroscience. Um,
What
so
was
that
what was your first degree?
I did natural sciences, so I did chemistry and psychology. So it's very unrelated, and it
Hmm.
was quite a new challenge for me. But I think I just had that motivation,
Yeah. Yeah.
like special personal motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, how are you now? Are you are you under good treatment? Do you manage your episodic cluster to your satisfaction? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I'm right now I'm good because I'm not in a bout.
Yeah.
I'll probably get one in the next couple of months, but I think um, I have good medication where I have verapamil. So I take that when I start to feel that I'm going into a bout, and I'll go back to the doctor and uh, ask for this medication. I also have oxygen, which I got a little bit after I was diagnosed. That was also a little bit of a struggle to get the oxygen, and Ouch were really helpful. That's the organisation for the understanding of cluster headache. They were really helpful to me and my family for getting oxygen, and that really changed things for me. Because I would always be worried about taking just as a personal thing. I was worried about taking medication a lot, um, and so oxygen felt like a really good strategy for me. Um, I also take triptans if I'm in a pinch. So if I'm out, it's really convenient to be able to do that.
Do you have the injections or do you
Yeah,
use nasal sprays?
yes. Well, I've used both, but I find the injections better personally.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I do.
And do you have the 3 milligram or the 6 milligram injections?
Do you know what? I don't remember.
I just
I
it's
don't
just that
remember.
in the last few years, um, the company made a 3 milligram dose, and some people who have the 6 milligram dose have found that they get side effects, so they sort of hesitate to take those injections. So I just wanted to mention it on this podcast, really, in case people are wondering whether there is any option for them. And a 3 milligram dose sometimes works just as well. And then, of course, you can take 4 throughout the day if people are having recurrent episodes throughout the day. That can be quite handy. But of course, with you would only need one, and
Yeah,
because you're only having one episode a day. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think one thing I used to find before I had the injections actually is I would take oral triptans, and they would actually come the attack would come back. So
right.
I wouldn't classify it as a different attack really, but it was just not pushed away enough almost.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, no, injections are great, and that sounds really good because I do have some of the side effects sometimes that come with them. So yeah, having that lower dose sounds brilliant.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Double check your dose.
Yeah, I will.
And tell me about the oxygen. So now you're in Leiden. Have you got oxygen with you? Has it been all right to
No, I need
get
to I need to sort that out.
that sorted?
It's hard with oxygen, I think,
Yeah,
because yeah, of the kind of the safety aspect of having oxygen, you have to make sure it's
yeah,
yeah, so I need to sort that out.
yeah.
And actually that's a good point because I need to prepare for the next
Yeah.
bout, and I think that's something I always neglect. Yeah.
So from what I'm hearing is that you sort of think, oh, it's gone away. I won't need to think about it ever again. And then suddenly, oh, here we are again. So
Yeah.
yeah, we normally would say to people, with the oxygen, especially in the UK, which is where most of our patients are most of the time, you can get a big cylinder for your home, and that's delivered by various different oxygen companies around the UK, using a high flow, an on-demand valve or a high flow mask can be very, very helpful, and sitting forward when you're using it. And having a portable oxygen cylinder, again, for people who are having recurrent episodes through a day, they'll have to go to work. Having one that they can take to work can be really, really useful. So the other thing I would probably say to you is, in thinking about preparation, to not wait until your bout starts to get the prescription of verapamil.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
that verapamil handy. So
Yeah.
especially, sometimes with the best one in the world, it's tricky to see a GP in the UK very quickly. So
Yeah.
preparing for the
It's really important.
yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah, and that's something I'm really trying to improve.
Have you
Yeah.
ever had a greater occipital nerve block for your time?
No,
No,
no, I haven't. It's not something I felt that I've needed
no,
so far, because I do have things that work for me.
yeah.
But yeah, no, it's really interesting. I would, just because um, I have the episodic form, so I if it ever got to a point where it was getting my bouts were getting longer, or
Yeah.
something like that, it's definitely something I would consider.
Good. How long are your bouts? How long do they normally last?
I think they're getting shorter, actually, because I think because of the use of verapamil. But
Yeah.
I think they used to be around 2 months, but I think now about a month, I would
Okay.
say.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, yeah,
I hear on the internet and various social media things about people using other things like vitamin D or taurine in Red Bull or things like that.
yeah,
Have you tried any? I mean, even before you were diagnosed, were there any other things that you tried that helped?
yeah, definitely. I would caffeine was a big one that I would use. Um, I would just have a shot of espresso, or have a chug a quick coffee down, and that did work. In terms of like other unconventional um, or kind of non-medication treatments, I would also take magnesium
Oh, okay.
at night, um, because I'd heard that that is something that might help. And yeah, I would, just for like a comfort thing, but in addition to medication, I'd also put like a hot, like a warm water bottle on my
Okay.
on the side of my face, and I found that that really kind of soothes the pain. But it's
Interesting.
because I always used to think, oh, I should ice it,
Yes.
but actually it's the heat kind of helped me.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I don't know if it would be helpful to
It's
others.
funny, isn't it? So I hear this from people with migraine as well. Some of them say, "Oh, I really like it. I put something really warm on my neck and shoulders," and other people are like, "Oh gosh, no, I have to have cold." Um, you need to do some research on that.
Yeah, no, it's really
Yeah,
interesting, actually, because
yeah,
I mean, this is just anecdotal, but I noticed that when my feet get really warm,
yeah,
I get a cluster headache. I don't, it must be something autonomic, but it's,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's
It
interesting though.
must be something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what I'm always seem to be saying on the podcast is more research is needed. So, having said that, tell us about your research. So, you've now gone to Leiden and beginning on a year of exploring, um, really trying to get to the heart of the condition. I should say the brain of the condition. So, tell us
Yeah,
your research.
yeah. So the focus of my research is a small, deep brain area. So it's deep inside the brain. It's called the hypothalamus, and it's involved in many basic functions in the human body. It's involved in temperature regulation, mood, autonomic control, as we were talking about, also your sleep cycles, and your daily and yearly bodily clock. So something that's really interesting in cluster headache is that they come often at the same time each day or night, and that they come in bouts seasonally. So that kind of points to this small area in the brain called the hypothalamus. So what I'm going to be doing is investigating if there's different signaling that's going on in people's brains with cluster headache involving the hypothalamus, involving this small area in the brain. And the way that I'm going to be doing it this year is we have generously donated post-mortem brain tissue from people who have lived with cluster headache. And we're going to be comparing this to people's brains who didn't have cluster headache, and see if there's any differences in this area of the brain, and if there's a way that this area is signaling differently, and it might lead to some interesting findings in the way that it might drive cluster headache, and also the ways that we can treat the condition. Yeah.
So this is not particularly anatomical differences. It's more in the functioning of the brain and the way that, the nerves and things transmit things or interact with each other. Is that right?
That's, partially, because obviously we just have the brain tissue, so it is partly anatomical. But there are signs that we can get from the tissue of how they used to function. So if there's a presence of particular chemicals, which we call neuropeptides, if there's more or less in certain areas, if different cells have more of these peptides or less of these peptides, it might tell us a little bit about how they used to function. And this, in combination with other research in living tissue, then we can work out how we can join that up and see how that area might be signaling differently.
Yeah. So it's getting a much deeper understanding of the processes within the brain. And I spoke to Phil Holland about what's going on in the brain, and he mentioned that he thinks of cluster headache as almost like a switch, an on-off switch, where migraine is more of a dysregulation process. And I think that obviously there's not a physical switch, but it's an interesting way, and it certainly lends itself to the way that attacks come and go, doesn't it? Thinking of that switch. So
definitely. And I think the switch idea is really interesting, because if we think about especially episodic cluster headache, why is it that in one period of time your threshold for getting an attack is so much higher, and then it almost completely switches off by the day? That's really interesting to us, and it might indicate that there's a difference in cells in the brain where they're kind of switching their profile, they're switching their function. So that's the kind of idea behind that, and that's something that I can investigate with this research, because when you have the actual tissue, there's things that we can see that we can't in living people, ethically, practically. There's only so much that you can get. So this is really interesting research. It hasn't been done before in cluster headache. So whatever we find, even if it's nothing, it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, it adds to our knowledge, even if it's a negative finding. Brilliant. Are you aware of any other particular aspects of cluster headache that other people are researching?
Of cluster headache, the group that I'm working with in Leiden, with Dr. Rolf Fronczek, his group, some of the PhD students are working to develop wearables that people with cluster headache can wear, and it will help us better track cluster headache attacks, and also help with better prediction of attacks eventually, hopefully. So that's the idea. And then there's also another study at the moment looking at low dose LSD, because anecdotally a lot of cluster headache sufferers sometimes use psychedelics to manage their pain. So a clinical study was really needed to see if there's a scientific basis to that theory. So yeah, there's really exciting things going on.
We have to quickly jump in and say that in the UK, psychedelics are illegal.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So when we can't recommend that people go out and source illegal drugs for any reason whatsoever. But it's good to hear that some people are looking, with structured research projects.
I think it's important. Yeah, I think you can't ignore that people are doing this. So I think it's really important that we study this in a scientific way.
Yeah.
Also for safety.
For safety, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, of course. Yeah.
Are there any things that do you have a message? Well, sort of coming to the end of the recording, do you have a message for families who have a child with cluster headache, or even adults who have cluster headache? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I would say I'd want people to know that they can ask for help. They shouldn't feel like they should have to minimize what they're feeling, and to really reach out to Ouch. I would say Ouch were they really changed things for me and my family, especially my parents. It really helped us kind of it helped me advocate for myself. And they just have such a wealth of experience and really good advice for if you're suffering currently. And if you are in the kind of depths of it, please reach out to people, because there are doctors who really care. There are specialists who really know what they're talking about, like yourself. And there's many people who out there who will be able to help you. It's just about seeking it out.
I would completely agree with your description of Ouch. Ouch UK is a wonderful organisation. And for people who are thinking, well, have I got cluster headache or is it something else? There is a quiz on the website of Ouch that says, do I have cluster headache? And I think it's really useful to then go through. You can put your own symptoms in. You can and then at the end of it, it comes out with this is likely that you have such and such diagnosis, which is a major step forward for people to then go armed with that information to the doctor. And if people wanted to self-refer themselves to us at the National Migraine Centre, if they put I think I may have cluster headache on the form, then we will do our very best to prioritise their appointment and get them in quickly, because we're very aware of the impact, especially when people are inbound.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Brilliant. Anything else that we should have covered that I've asked you?
I did ask my mum actually if she had kind of any advice, especially for parents. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that, because I think it's just as hard on parents sometimes for children with cluster headache. So she also recommended Ouch, and she said just don't underestimate that, like your physical presence and being there for your kid, like holding their hand while it's happening and reassuring them. It can be really helpful, because it's scary for kids. She said remind them to make appointments as they get older. And encourage them not to wait until the headaches start.
Very, very good advice. That's lovely that she's sent us all those thoughts as well, so thank you for that. So is there anything else that you'd like to share that you've found out while you've been thinking about researching cluster headache?
I mean, especially for this podcast, I was thinking about teenagers with cluster headache. So I did a little dive, and I found some studies that showed that if you started having cluster headache as a teenager before the age of 20, your time to diagnosis was approximately 18 years on average. And then this reduces as people get older, not get older, but if you started having them between the age of 20 and 40, then your time to diagnosis is about 7 or 8 years. So we can see that people who start having them younger suffer for longer without a diagnosis. So it's really important that we kind of recognize that teenagers and children can have cluster headache, and it's something, it should be kind of a warning sign. Yeah.
Was that a recent study, or was that a while ago?
Yes, I believe that was no, it was recent. It was in the 2020s.
In the 20s, that I can't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's still quite shocking, actually, because when I first started at the National Migraine Centre, which is some years ago now, it was we knew that the average time to diagnosis for an adult was about 10 years. And my hope was that things have improved a bit, but it sounds, especially with young people, as if there's still a lot of raising awareness that we need to do. And then, of course, once somebody is diagnosed, then getting the right help, because there are not a lot of pediatric headache specialist neurologists who have an interest in this rare and severe condition. So, yeah, more to be done.
Definitely.
So, Izzy, thanks so much for being part of the podcast. I'm hoping to speak to a couple of other people who've had cluster headache in childhood. But I think, the fact that you are using this experience to hopefully help people understand this completely awful condition is really wonderful. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's been really nice to chat.
Coming up next time on Heads Up, Mike Smalley joins us to explain how the law can help people living with cluster headache understand their rights and seek support at work. Thank you for listening to the Heads Up podcast. Visit our website to book your appointment with a world-class headache doctor wherever you are in the UK. There is no need for a referral. You can refer yourself. Our headache specialist doctors are looking forward to helping you soon.